thing started.
Hello, we're back again.
Oh, yes, again.
Yeah. This is like half an hour after our last video from our perspective, so
Yeah, round two.
either
Right.
either a week later or
No, it'll be a
minutes
week.
for you
Yeah,
guys.
probably a week later
Yeah,
or
or
minutes. Oh yeah,
posting
yeah.
time a week.
It'll be minutes later for. I still think it's funny that the vast majority of people who will ever see this, are just far and far in the future.
Which
5 years
makes
from now, when we reach, critical mass or whatever, and then all of a sudden get a big wave back.
yeah,
And then right now we've got the small dedicated people, which are effectively just friends and family members, for as far as I can tell.
yeah,
So
I don't
hello.
know. But yeah, hello people, past and present, or no, future and present.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You're watching this from the past. You're an interesting person.
yeah. But it kind of makes the topic that we're going to discuss relevant to you future people
Yeah,
because
well, yeah.
we're
Depends
going
how
to.
future you are,
Yeah. Well, if you are too far, then it's kind of a moot point. But
or an
yeah,
interesting historical perspective.
hmm, we want to debate, and no, debate's probably the wrong term, but
Yeah,
compare our views of the future to find out why they differ.
yeah. We were going to touch on. We were going to try and reach the sort of axiomatic differences that we
Mhm.
have. I thought we actually kind of touched on it quite a bit with the UFO conversation the other day,
Hmm.
which was, I'm not sure. I just had a weird feeling that that was somehow related to it,
Hmm.
because it's like a metaphysical theory, and that kind of gets at,
Yes.
your
Yeah.
sort of fundamental belief of reality.
Because I think you were talking about how, what was it? You had a sense that if humanity as a whole wasn't going to progress beyond the current form we know it as towards something more,
Hmm.
then there was a sense of pointlessness.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Like, what are we aiming at?
the point that I had in my head, we're going off on a tangent already, but let's have fun.
No, this sounds good.
Yeah. The point that was in my head as you were saying that I didn't blurt out with to give you space to speak was basically reincarnation and a sort of there's humanity as it is progressing along the direction, but individual souls going off on their own progression while
So
humanity doesn't.
spiritual progression becoming the goal rather than like physical progression.
Yeah.
See, I don't see them as different.
How?
How many souls are there?
I don't think that's a question that like there are so many different versions of that question or versions of the way of interpreting that
Human
that
souls.
again,
My point being, if it was spiritual progression to what?
what would we be progressing to in a physical sense?
Whatever the next stage of evolution is.
Which from the conversation we were having sounded like coming closer to spiritual
Yes.
or through some sort of technology that's a mix of spiritual and physical.
Yes. Yeah. That is my belief. Yeah.
Mm. So if we as consciousnesses end up there anyway, far sooner than humanity as a whole, like the image I have is that if you've got a river with, say, sand on the bottom and there's a hump in the sand, then the river forms a lump over that. And my image is that that's what humanity is, that it's the souls being part of humanity and then flowing past it. The river continues moving, but the hump stays in the same place, although it may move slowly downstream in the same direction as the general current. It's not
But what's in
progressing.
it? What's in it for the souls?
They're
Is it
getting
just
the same.
individualistic for the soul, like it's all about my soul and me and my progression, or is it some kind of
The,
great calling for an advancement of a?
the general wider philosophy or philosophical structure that goes along with that view, as I understand it, is souls forming as basically motes of nothingness and then growing and growing until eventually they get to the point of re-merging with the consciousness of the universe as a whole, sort of a way of the universe experiencing itself.
I think we had this conversation pretty early on in our friendship.
Probably.
There's a thought experiment I always give to people who believe in reincarnation,
Yeah.
or even most people, which was I might as well play it out, seeing as I brought it up. Do you believe in reincarnation or in a soul having multiple lives? Seeming lots of people do. Okay. Do you think that the amount of lives that you may be able to have is limited?
If we're looking for my answer on it, it's may be able to have limited, not really, but likely to have, yes. In the sense
Due to
of
restrictions imposed by someone else
due
or personal
to
choice?
more personal choice.
Okay. No, I can accept that. Do you believe that those lives need to be had in chronological order? Are they bound by time in the same way physical existence is?
I think that growth I think that they don't necessarily have to be, but the evidence that we have suggests that they do tend to be. Like now, the evidence that I'm referring to there is now just where to start this from so it doesn't sound mad.
Accounts,
Basically,
personal experience. Yeah.
that memories that people have based on an assumption that truthful until proven lying, basically. With the knowledge that there are misinterpretations and lies out there, there are definitely fantasies that take the form of past life memories. But
Yeah,
people
and
say,
distinguishing them is incredibly difficult.
yeah, well, generally, if someone claims to have been an ancient Egyptian princess, like, I have my doubts because that's a very romantic sort of past life idea. But if someone says, I was a peasant and died in a field, it's like, well, there were tons of those. So that's quite likely.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Or remembering gruesome death details that end up being true or whatever. I don't want to, proving or disproving, but
Yeah.
as always, my thought experiments don't work particularly well on you because you're not one for giving yes or no answers. But effectively, the argument that I always come to at the end of is if you answer in the right way with these things, then the final question is, then what is to stop one soul living all of those lives? If they're not bound by time and the amount of lives that they could have are effectively infinite, wouldn't it therefore all be one person? Or could it not therefore all be one person or one
Yes,
soul?
in parallel.
Yes.
But
And would that not
also,
make you indistinguishable from a divine being?
how do I put it? I'm just searching for a good metaphor for it. Right, if you have a whole lot of cloth spread out,
I don't believe it personally, but well,
yep.
not in the way that the thought experiment plays out.
Sorry?
I believe in the I suppose I believe in the Buddhist world map, which is it's Buddha's all the way up. It's like a multi-tiered metaphysical system.
Yes, I think I agree.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
just from personal experience. And mystical experiences and drugs and all that kind of stuff that I've encountered in my life.
Yeah. I think the oh now now this is personal view, interpretation, speculation, so on. I don't need to justify to anyone. But the nature of our consciousness at the deepest levels is the same as the universe as a whole. So it's like having a large piece of fabric, you could say space time, whatever, and then you pull a clump of it together and mold that, or a massive sheet of very flexible rubber. And you start with a little knot in it, and then that grows and grows, and then is molded over time by experiences. And then that's a person. And then there's another one here, and another one here, and they can all move around and so on and do stuff, but they're all fundamentally connected. Or like if you had a thin sheet of water on a surface, and you started to soak that up into material and then build it up more.
If you stripped away the analogy part of it and described it physically, how would you describe it?
Physical means analogy to me, but like I'm thinking of the experience that is well enough distributed across time and space on Earth.
If you meant patterns, I suppose a
No,
pattern is I'm describing as physical.
The sense of universal oneness that is a tolerably common experience in psychedelic experiences, spiritual encounters, shamanic experiences across thousands of years and across opposite sides of the planet throughout that whole time. A reliable sort of trickle of people experience that sense of universal oneness of the entire universe as one.
I
And we
was
are all connected.
I was aiming at vibrational states with that question as a more practical description of how it would play out, in, or at least in my view.
I don't know. I think I tend to steer away from the vibrational states one because it's got a bad rap. Like people saying, just increase your vibration. It's like, to how many hertz? It's like, as an engineering approach.
Yeah, making it too physical. Yeah, I can get that. Yeah.
Yeah. But just as a metaphor for the.
Yeah, I take that as metaphor.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the vibrational nature of it is literally vibration, as we would describe it in the physical realm. But I believe that as an analogy on, say, a spiritual realm, or vibration in a higher dimension, perhaps.
I think there is a lot of truth to it, but it's also close enough to other things that we encounter on a relatively daily basis that the concepts can be confused, and then it's like, oh, you're saying that everything's vibrating at certain frequencies and you just need to increase the frequency. What are you talking about? No, it's like that, but it's not.
Yeah it's still an analogy, I suppose.
Yeah
The thing that may be vibrating, I don't think, is this in this dimensional plane, though I think we can experience it. Yeah, the vibration thing is more about, seeing as we've worked, I'll explain it. It's trying to delineate a scale within that realm, I think. The idea of having small scale, which would be bedrock, up to large scale being like greater self kind of scale of thinking, or even beyond that to the realm of gods. And the idea of, if you get that far out and you believe them, they're in the same realm, like a spiritual scale of the scale of spiritual minds.
Mm.
And I think that the vibration thing is meant to be an analogy for scaling, going up and down that scale.
Mm. Yeah.
And if you get to the bottom of that scale, you're pretty bedrock, but there's
Yeah.
still something there. Like
Yeah.
say, when people talk about the earth itself having consciousness, or a rock, the idea of being baseline
Mm.
and going up. And if you want to make the angels and devils argument, then you flip it to inverse, to a negative state beneath that,
Mm.
which is supposed to be beneath everything, trying to crawl up. And then you have the battleground argument in our world.
Mm. The description of where those sort of demonic entities come from that I've heard is, what is it? In a somewhat speculative, if the metaphor works, we'll run with it, but it's just a theory type level, that they were left over from the universe before ours and refused to unite with the universal consciousness at the end of it, and then they are on their own sort of path and can only sort of connect with us through the emotional emotional level on that scale. I find the electromagnetic spectrum is a good metaphor for it, but
Mm.
but only when we open ourselves to them. So you can
Opening the door.
you can see people who are brooding on dark thoughts for a long time and working themselves up more and more. They become obsessed or possessed by certain thoughts or emotions or
Yeah.
drives and end
Or
up shooting
people
up the
who try and summon these kinds of things.
film.
They're actively
Yeah.
going out to open the door. Personally, I believe. I don't think I agree with the leftover from the previous universe thing. That seems a bit not my conception.
Mm.
But certainly the opening the door and the being part of a negative state, I do believe that they are part of this space,
Mm.
like spiritual antimatter almost.
Yeah, like sub-physical, like you described.
Yeah, being the inverse sign to the direction that we want to aim in.
Mm.
For there to be an up, there must be a down.
Mm. Yeah. The fact of their existence seems to be supported by evidence. The where they came from is kind of
Yeah.
relevant to that.
Yeah. And you get into
Mm.
very religious domain very quickly with that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Mm.
that as long as there is free will, there will always be a negative path.
Yeah.
And I think it's more of a natural consequence of that existence.
Mm.
And I think the reason why it's less common is that most people don't choose that path.
Because most people find the results of moving down that path unpleasant, and so they move in a different direction.
I mean, yes, to a certain extent, but I think that is also kind of a cynical view of humanity. I think for the most part, we are more good than evil.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not saying that we're more evil than good. I'm saying that there are many people, and quite possibly every soul at some point, who
Mm,
experience that.
I suppose, yeah.
And
I think the ejection is the idea, it's sort of an implicit idea of you start at 0 and you could go 1 or -1 off the gate. And I get the feeling we probably start at +10, +20, something, and the path goes from there. But again, that also depends on your upbringing.
Yeah.
The kids who are abused as children often end up being abusers, kind of thing, and that's maybe you're starting at -10 there.
Rather than being one scale, I think of it more as here is a space, a multi-dimensional volume of potential action, and then you start out sort of blind and feeling your way, and eventually you learn, oh, that form of action ends up with painful consequences. That form of action feels better. Okay, I'll do more there, and you gradually work your way out until you're a fully rounded, compassionate human being who's explored all the necessary volume of that in order to be able to move on to the next step.
It's interesting. The psychologist in me wonders if the so-called spiritual realm that we all feel called to or believe that's there is really like exploring the subconscious. And the idea of like it's a whole physical dimension that's only based comprised on action and understanding morality and stories and meaning. It's like, that sounds a little similar.
Yeah.
Not that I wish to reduce it to that. I very much don't. But
I like to remember the fact or bring up the fact that it works either way. Like, if you treat it as a pretty metaphor for the subconscious, or you treat it as a real place, if you treat
I suppose it
spiritual
doesn't
encounters
matter.
as though they're encounters with beings greater than yourself who have lessons to teach, and then approach them with humility and a wish to grow, then they tend to work better and life tends to work better. So it's like, what has good results as an action? What has good results as an interpretation? What's real? Don't know. What works? These seem to.
Yeah, I suppose it doesn't really matter the belief in the end as long as, well, as long as you behave the right way. Define
But
right, that kind of problem.
that's
But
subjective. It's like, it's
yes,
by
no,
what do you
agreed.
want to have the
Which is
consequences of?
which is why I'm Christian, is I believe that there is an objective right and an objective
Mm.
wrong, rather than it being moral interpretation.
So subjective versus objective morality. That's something I've always not had a good handle on. Like, on the intellectual side, I go for subjective morality, but on the feeling side, it's like some things feel wrong, and I don't have a good way of rectifying that. A good way of.
Well, I suppose it depends on whether you think the individual or reality takes precedence.
I would say it more comes down to whether reality imposes. There are definitely things that. There was one description of ethics that I vaguely remember as the things that work. Like, there's certain patterns of behavior and interaction that result in good outcomes, and there's certain patterns that don't. And
Iterated games.
yeah, yeah, the iterated games of life and choosing actions that will result in good results in the iterated games, where immoral actions result in bad results in the iterated games of life.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole purpose of the religious exercise, is to ask that question.
Mm.
You know, if there was someone who consciously set up a set of rules which were the ideal behaviors, what would they be? And then trying to flesh that out over all of humanity's lives and stories and amalgamating them and trying to explain what those rules are and how best to act. And, not getting it right for a long time.
Mm.
And as the stories go on, getting better and better and better and better and better at trying to hit that mark.
Mm. I think that.
Because we have this problem where we can see the future
Mm.
and we can understand the cost that comes with it, which means that we have an individual life. And this is really a large part of the problem in the modern world, as far as I'm concerned, is that an individual living an individual life time scale, if they care about humanity, needs to think about humanity in humanity's time scale, which is like 100,000 to millions of years.
Mm.
And an individual can attempt that and try and think all that way through. rather than being capped to his own life.
Or at the very least can think of his several generations of his children and think back
Yeah,
to
I say
his
attempt
great
was
grandparents.
yeah. It's not like you can actually compute that, but
Yeah.
the point of is even at a very low resolution scale, we can understand that humanity will go on for this extended length of time,
Mm,
and what I do now will affect all of that. Maybe.
mm,
So therefore, how do I behave now that works for me now and works for all of that?
mm,
Or if it's a trade-off, which is preferable?
mm. I think we can agree that is it social constructionists who think that all morals are just randomly chosen by society, essentially. I think that's wrong.
Yeah, relativism,
Yeah,
social, moral relativists, maybe.
yeah, that sounds better. Although social constructionist is also related, I think.
I think that's similar, but I don't remember
Mm.
exactly.
Yeah, but moral relativism in the heavy sense seems wrong because there are ethical approaches to life that work and ethical approaches that don't. And
Well, it's simply that it's pretty easy to break the argument, and people
mm,
make that case of just because you believe something's wrong doesn't mean it's wrong for someone else, and you just go, "Okay, Hitler," and then
mm,
everyone's like, "Oh, yeah, you're right."
mm,
It doesn't go very far. All you need to do is take an argument to an extreme, and if it breaks immediately, then it's not much use.
yeah.
You know, your right and my right may be different. How do you mediate that? Like, what if I hit you in the face? And you go, okay, yeah, fair point. I don't have an argument against that.
Yeah,
And then
and
it comes
it's
down to a scramble for power, and that's not helpful.
yeah, it's interesting also that that comes down to what you and Peter or you take from Peterson as the sort of base nature of reality of pain. It's like
I love that compliment. Thanks. Your subconscious was like, you and Peterson talk about this. I was like, oh, I love that association. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. But it's like oh like think everything is relative and nothing is fundamental. Can I prick you with a pin then? It's like, can I punch your face? It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
no, why not?
yeah,
Because
exactly.
it hurts.
Yeah. You can construct all kinds of beliefs in your ivory tower, but the second you touch
Mm.
reality, your
Or a
brain
hot
immediately
stove.
goes, yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah.
I feel like we're losing the spiritual thing that we were talking about before. We've gone into sort of this objective morality style.
Yeah, I like it because it's kind of it curves back sort of near the original target topic of axioms regarding the path of
Yeah,
society.
I do think we should get to that for sure. But I
Mm,
think the thing I wanted to go back to was this idea of we have this game set up. Let's make
mm,
that analogy. This is a game. Is the point of it the individual spiritual soul progressing up and beyond this? Is the point of it the species itself progressing up and beyond altogether? Or is there no up and beyond to progress out into? Like, where are we going? What is the point of this game? Or is the point of this game to create a stable, on the ground existence?
I feel like we've got, in terms of a direction to head, we've got one end of the line of avoid pain. Seems like a reasonable directive as a starting point. But then there's
Mm.
a, a target to go to, and the targets that are usually held up do not avoid pain entirely. They sometimes go
Whose pain?
through. the pain that is often necessary on the meaningful path is that which is actively taken on for a higher purpose.
Is the higher purpose removing the pain from others?
That's not against it, but I think it's like this
Oh
is
God, crucifixion.
sorry. Oh yes.
Yeah.
There's oh part of why I have trouble with the pain is fundamental to life argument is that the reason for removing the pain, the thing that is of more value than the pain, is not lack of pain. It's love and compassion, and not just, oh, I love you, my lover. It's something far deeper that is difficult to comprehend for us mere mortals. Like, to use the analogy, however the correct terminology is to describe it that you referenced, Jesus was not nailed to the cross because he felt friendly towards everyone.
Hmm.
He in
Yeah.
that
Our
story
conception of
that
the word
is,
love is wrong.
yeah, like whether or not, leaving aside all questions of the spiritual facts of that situation or the historical facts or any of that, that
Yeah.
story exists now and is held up and has been
Even
held up for millennia as a what is it? As a admirable act.
yeah, he is effectively a philosopher that stood up in a peaceful and loving way to save all future generations through his own sacrifice and torture.
Mm. And we see so many equivalent patterns in our own stories over the centuries, as we referenced in a recent one, Iron Man sacrificing
Mm.
himself for half the universe.
To save the universe, yeah.
Yeah, how many
For
stories
all
of
future generations.
how many stories of some hero closing the door on the rest of their group so that they can be the one to push the button that will save the world but kill them? Like
Yeah.
that idea of self-sacrifice. Okay, you're putting yourself either to death or in a lot of pain or both.
Yeah.
For the sake of what? It's not just preventing
The
others
species.
experiencing pain. There's more to it than the mere biological motivation. Like that's part of it. Like it's the same thing, I think. But that's
Well,
something that works or is
the
necessary.
it was spiritual salvation in the Bible, in the crucifixion story. It wasn't physical salvation, it was spiritual salvation,
And how many
was the
people have
goal.
died for ideas that they believe are necessary? How many people have written books for which they've been persecuted? It's like the physical salvation of those you care about is not the only form of salvation that people sacrifice themselves for in the salvation of others' sense.
Hmm.
There's something we're aiming at, something we're moving towards there. And like as you say, the idea of love is insufficient. It's I
Well,
care.
yeah,
It's the idea of
it is care. Yeah, it is.
yeah,
I care about you. I wish the best for you. I
and in many
want
ways
nothing
for
but
the
the best
world,
to happen to you and for the
for,
world and for humanity. Yeah,
for every person, and
like the real meaning of the word philanthropist. Philanthropist. Bleh.
mm,
I can never get that one. But the idea is lover of humanity.
mm,
It took a long time for me to explain this concept to my wife. The idea that you could love a friend or a stranger
mm,
or someone you don't know, like you've never met. That idea of recognizing the other as a human being and having care and compassion for them.
Mm.
Compassion might be a better word in modern English, at least. But it's not strong enough. I think love is still
Yes.
the right word because it carries that strength and that weight.
Mm.
I think the problem isn't that we've defined love wrong. I think the problem is we've said that it's unacceptable to love anyone other than your significant other or your family.
Mm.
You know, to love a friend is wrong, or a stranger is wrong. One
Yeah,
should
like
love all.
that drunk mate who's like, I just love you, man. It's like, yeah, get sober. It's like,
Yeah, but the sober people should be feeling that.
mm,
Yeah. And perhaps loosening the inhibitions is the reason why that person felt it.
mm.
That people could do that if only they let go of their own pride. Anyway, back to the point is, where are we going? Like, okay, I'll go with you. In
Mhm.
your perspective, what is the point of the game?
To move towards that thing that we can only, or that state that we can only vaguely perceive as universal love.
That higher state.
Yes. And I'm not saying that that is the precise goal. I'm saying that's a vague light in the direction where we're moving. And
Mm,
different people
okay. So
find
rather
that
than
they're drawn to different
defining an
aspects of it.
endpoint, you're defining a trajectory.
Yes. Like we can
Okay.
see where we started, we can't see where we're finishing. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Is that hmm, is that individual, or is that for everyone as a group? Like, is the goal for individuals to get there, or is the goal for everyone to get there at the same time? It's all well and good to say this direction, but I don't know. There has to be a line of significance that must be crossed in my mind, like a barrier.
I think it's individual, but not exclusionary in the sense of individuals being closer to it.
Okay. Do you
Like
believe that once an individual has crossed that barrier,
some threshold,
yeah,
which,
yeah,
yeah,
threshold, yeah,
yeah,
that's probably a better word, threshold, that they would stay with the rest of the people?
some,
So
which is where we
my
necessarily like
question,
put it.
yeah, 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 the Dalai Lama
Mm,
and etc. My
mm.
question with that is more: is this a is this a water flowing analogy, as in where the where the temporary structure that the spirit flows through from the progression from one side to the other of this threshold? Or is it something that our species as a whole is meant to go through? Are we merely vessels
Mm.
for the spirits to make this journey and go on to the next? Or is the point for the species itself to transcend into that realm?
I have issues with both of those, but I think it's more the continuous flow one that it's not for humanity to progress, but it's not that we are vessels for the spirit to flow through. It's that we are the spirit that's doing the flowing.
Yes, but I
Mm.
mean physically, bodies.
The physical one, yeah, yeah. Like this body dies and then rots and nutrients continue their cycling.
Yes.
But the spirit continues progressing and there's
Do you
enough.
believe? that the human being will ever progress out of this state then?
Not on a timescale that's relevant to the argument.
What do you mean?
Well, I think
I'm sorry. I don't see any timescale that's irrelevant to this argument.
the progression of the individual soul is dramatically faster than the progression of the species, such that it's difficult, that there are issues in seeing the progression of the species in the noise of history within the perspective that we have. There certainly seems to be progress, but how far it will go and what the limitations of that might be, like it's the I talked about having a sort of sandbank in a river with the hump in the water as it flows over the sandbank representing humanity. That if you have individual scattered bits in the water that represent the individual souls that are progressing across, there are issues with the analogy, but that river flows much faster than the signpost, the position of humanity moves, even if humanity is slowly moving forward and becoming better at this process through an accumulation of experience over time. I'm more interested in going with the river as a soul than moving humanity forward, but both are the same. Both those goals result in the same action.
One serves the other.
Yeah. Moving forward as an individual in this life moves humanity as a whole forward. But then more
I
rivers
find the
come
argument
behind.
rather uncompelling. I am supposed to push humanity forward for my own selfish benefit. That's my great sacrifice story. It's only for me.
I never saw it that way.
Like we talked before, if we are not going anywhere, then why bother? My point is, I might reach a higher plane. Whoop-de-fucking do. If everyone else still suffers here, so that they can reach enlightenment and get up too. Yeah, I guess. But why is my own enlightenment so valuable to me? What makes me so special that I would leave others behind?
There's an axiom somewhere that this is challenging.
I wonder if my philosophy is more in line of the Buddha who comes back. Not that I'm claiming to be one, obviously I'm not that arrogant, but the idea of if but a single soul is still here unenlightened, then the mission is not complete. That no one should be left behind to figure it out on their own.
Not many Buddhas come back.
No. That as far as the story goes, once you cross over, you generally stay. We never really had a perspective on, perhaps I'm missing something, but I never heard a perspective on the Buddhas that came back from the Buddhas that didn't. You know, what are these rebellious characters in the myth? Are they heroes? I mean, I know they're lauded as heroes by the people that are here. I mean, obviously, but are they like great rebels or something to the spiritual order from the other side of the argument? I don't know the stories well enough to know if that's part of the myth structure.
The way I feel it in my head is that it's about increasing individuation. Hang on a minute. There's something else I've read about. It's not about There was something I read that described it as not about becoming a particular thing, not going to any particular goal, but becoming more yourself, possibly in the same way that you have a child and you put 10 children together and they're pretty similar. As you stack up life experiences, you sort of diverge off in many ways, and the more, this metaphor isn't perfect, but do you get what I mean? That it's self-actualization. The more you develop, the more of you there is. And
Mm.
for some, that nature, that self, leads to being a Buddha who comes back. And for others, it's going on to the next adventure. Like, I've always been
I
drawn
mean,
to the idea of like astral projection and seeing what's out there in new spaces and experimenting with new ways. So I get pulled in that direction, and the idea of leaving people behind, it's like that. Is there an uncomfortable realization there?
because there is a lot of that that's compelling, but I would say that it I find it coming up with the to I find objections coming up within myself to that based on personal experience that I had with the idea of a higher self,
Mm,
like from my own personal experiences, anecdotal. My beliefs are that there is like a grander version of me
mm,
in the spiritual realm, and that I am but a small part of that. And through moments in my life, I've been able to have greater access to that greater mind,
mm,
and depending on the state I'm in, the amount of it that I can access was increased or decreased,
mm,
and having even communication with it being very clear that it is a far greater thing than I.
mm. There are
That
systems.
to me, that wouldn't
Mm,
track with the idea of my purpose here is to become more like me, because I feel like I am like an envoy almost. Like this greater part of me has chosen to have this part of me be here. And my sense was always that that would be the case for others as well, assuming that we're all equal, which I always have.
depends where you draw the border of I. Like, if your border of I includes the you who's conscious here, and your subconscious and the higher self, then that the
I
growth
view
of
the
that
subconscious
entire
as
being.
quite physical,
Mm,
mostly. I view that as physically within my mind. But the higher self, I do not. And
mm,
yes, my personal border does encompass. Oh, that's blurry.
mm,
I feel great affiliation with the higher me.
mm.
I still feel like it's me, but because I am less, most of the time I mean just this part of me. But I don't view that as you, as an
Mm,
other, if that makes sense.
yeah.
I feel that it would be me if unburdened by my physical limitations.
Mm.
Only so much mind may fit in this physical form, is my guess.
There are systems that are or have as their ultimate goal the unifying with that higher self in the Western tradition.
To explain.
Well, the one that I'm aware of, because that's the one that was being described at the time where I was reading it, was that I don't know if anyone's heard of the Golden Dawn, but it's probably been misconstrued in a whole bunch of ways. But the full books are out there in public, so you can go through and see for yourself what's in them. But that's a system of training and development with Christian symbolism, because it was developed by practicing Christians, and intended to help people develop the latent capabilities of their mind and soul to eventually get to the point of unifying with the higher self.
Okay,
And
that sounds interesting.
then some people who'd through that route reached the threshold we were referring to, um, would hang around to help those who were below that threshold, and they were referred to as ascended masters. And reaching that point was described as only the first step in the progression. It's like it might take several lifetimes to get there, but that's like,
Mm.
well done, you completed step one.
Yeah, once climbing over the first precipice, you can see the next one, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And the idea that once, I think implicit in some of what you've said is the assumption that once hypothetically we reach that threshold to move beyond the physical, that then suddenly we can just be hedonistic and there are no more worthy duties. Where I think that there are other great works to undertake. It's
Mm.
that you don't need the hard reset of death to keep
There's a
you
new
growing.
challenge at the next. I could see that.
Yeah.
Upon reaching that, yeah, I wouldn't say that I believe the hedonistic part of that, but I get what you're getting at.
Mm.
The
Well, that
idea
was
that
sort of like,
one
if
would
not
get to
that,
that
was my point.
point. Yeah, one would get to that point and not be done.
The
And
sort
go,
of people
okay,
who would get there would
yeah, there
not.
is a new
Yeah.
a new field with new challenges. And perhaps being in that state, those new challenges seem more pressing than whatever the challenges we perceive given our state.
Mm,
You know, we're maybe concerned with the future of humanity physically,
mm,
and you may reach that state and realize that that's actually kind of irrelevant, and then change it to actually being in this state, reaching the next state is the most important thing because then you're part of this next series of problems that need to be solved.
mm,
Perhaps. I mean, it would make a lot of sense given
mm.
a lot of the spiritual arguments that people have made.
Yeah, there's some element of philosophy of those sort of things that, what was it? All cause and effect flows down from, say, Solar Logos, ultimate universal consciousness, down through the layers of vibration, layers of distance from the physical, down
Mm,
towards here, and it would make sense that there's stuff that needs to be done on those layers to keep it
mm,
working well. And part of that
like
philosophical
Wars of the
structure that,
Gods.
yeah, yeah. And you could have, well, metaphorically speaking, gods and demigods and all the different structures. Like you look at the biblical descriptions of angels, and like those ain't human. Whatever they are,
Yeah,
however benevolent they are, they're effing terrifying. At least that's the way they're described.
and that's the
Um,
point.
yeah, and the idea that the wider metaphysical universe is bustling
Mm.
is something that strikes a deep chord with me. It's
That's
busy.
interesting because that sort of it sort of unites our two views as far as I'm concerned.
Mm,
Because it makes it less the progressing to the next stage makes it less about me and more as a calling to do to serve in a greater arena
mm,
rather than simply to progress for my own sake,
yeah.
which I find far more compelling.
And I think if I got there and found it was just for my own sake, it would be like, oh, this is fun for a while. And then I'd get bored and come back.
In return, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the idea of heaven as
Perhaps
eternal
that's why
bliss.
only a few come back. Less
Mm,
because it's internal bliss, but more because most find their calling in that higher space, and those that
mm,
come back to help recruit. You go,
mm.
hey, this is how you get there. You know,
Yeah,
we need more people there.
yeah. Supposedly there's less struggle as you go up the layers. Like we talked about the demonic side being on the negative, sort of below the physical. Like that's
Mm,
a harsher environment, and then the physicals,
that would make us the closest to it.
yeah, yeah. Like we need to eat and take care of our bodies, and there's illness and suffering, and then the
Physical
supposedly,
desires.
yeah, yeah, the temptations to err and sin, and however you personally see
Yeah.
that. But there's less of that on the next layers up, and there's still struggles. But the idea is as you continue up that hill, there would still be worthy causes, but
Mm.
there's less pain along the way.
I'm wondering if I should commit more of my life to this now. I've always been sort of flirting with the ideas,
Mm,
but never fully committed to any of it. It's interesting.
yeah. Should we segue into civilization? Because I think that
Yeah.
the perspective here has a lot of bearing on how we each see the
Mm.
future of civilization.
Which is why we came to that, because it clearly delineates our two perspectives. Yours being um, humanity is the an obstacle that spirit flows through to have challenges through.
Trial ground or
Yeah,
a training ground? Yeah.
training ground. Yeah, and therefore too much, it becoming too good, is a problem.
Not something that we would fight against, but something that is inherently predisposed against
Yeah,
by the nature of
yeah,
our
as if the structure
existence.
is set up so that it would not happen
Mm,
for this, that, or other reason, because otherwise there would not be with it. There wouldn't be a struggle to struggle against,
mm,
which gives you your cyclical view. Your there is no escape trajectory view for the collective, but perhaps for the individual soul.
mm.
And
But
mine was the
then
opposite, which is the idea that the species itself will eventually all get through the gate, and that is a goal.
I think when religion is brought into it, though, it's still there is a collective. The collective view can broaden to touch on that there is a higher element to existence, and that this is sounding like older Christian doctrine that there is worth to righteous action even in this tiny backwater of God's grand creation. There
Mm,
is a contribution to the glory of the whole.
yes,
I'm just sort of channeling the mental image of a say 1800s preacher or
yeah.
1500s.
Even
Yeah,
as a peasant, you must still be righteous.
yeah,
Even if you are but a grain of sand, you are still within God's kingdom.
yeah. And like the journey through the training ground of humanity can be uh filled with struggles and privation and hardship, or it can be well guided by those who are half a step ahead of you.
Mm. I wonder if our perceptions are not actually separate, but
Mm,
choices that you can make once you have reached that threshold. Because my perception was one of continuously returning to humanity itself has eclipsed the threshold. Whereas your perspective is more of getting through to that threshold so that you can be of service in the next area.
Yeah, I think I hadn't put too much thought into what's over that threshold. Only that
Something
it's
of meaning.
something.
I
Yeah,
find
I
it
think.
to be a greater calling because
Yeah.
I don't think spiritual beings, whatever we may be, the ones that are currently bound in humanity, are so hedonistic that if it was heaven in the pearly gates idea, we would stay.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it must be a greater challenge, or else we would get bored.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, as far as I'd thought ahead for myself in this life was the idea that was sort of an intense curiosity to experience what comes after death and then take it from there.
Mm,
I hadn't sketched out to my own enlightenment. That seems like too far out. That's too lofty. But I'd taken it as, what is it? I go, I've got these cycles, and hopefully at some point I'll start remembering past ones, but I don't know if that'll happen in this life. But as a guiding principle in life, that's what is my guiding principle in life? There's something there, something fiery almost, that it's
your
like,
grand narrative.
yeah, I'm running towards something, but I don't consciously know what it is.
Something meaningful, clearly, that's willing to
Yeah,
sacrifice everything else for it.
yeah, and not just something. Hang on a minute. The thing I'm most willing to sacrifice to get there is myself.
Physically.
No, it's like emotionally and like the physical, like in the
Emotional?
sense of, hang on, like emotional, sorry, physical sacrifice feeling trivial.
Mm,
Like it can be inconvenient. Like I have responsibility here. I have people who love me. I have a son to raise. I can't go dying now, right? But at the same time, like if it was a case of in some disastrous situation, I sitting here comfortably in a nice warm house, I feel like strapping the last parachute to my son wouldn't be a problem.
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
feels
If I
trivial.
was to go, so be it.
Yeah, yeah. Like there's almost a sense of if I can go in a way that is of more benefit than just dying slowly in a rest home, then
Mm,
that would be awesome. But at the
a
same time,
just death.
yeah, a painful death is not nice. But
But if it's for a
hang
good
on,
cause.
painful, I was thinking of in the rest home, like a slow decline. It's like,
Ah, interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
where physical pain for a
an
just
honourable
cause.
death.
Yeah, it's like there's,
It's like the Spartan idea.
yeah, the idea being that no matter how much I sacrifice, there will be something left. And that, oh, wait, this is coming up from subconscious, I think. So it's not necessarily logical or anything, but like, well, of course that's out the window a long time ago, but like the more I sacrifice for that thing I'm running towards of meaningfulness, and I don't know what that is, but the more I sacrifice for that, the more I will be. It's like, oh, I heard of charity described as being twice blessed, as it blesses both those who give and those who receive.
Mm,
It's like the more it's very similar to the way Peterson describes it as lifting your load to make it meaningful. But there was something else he said, but this one yeah, like, I'm not consciously seeing out to and grappling with the issues that you brought up about enlightenment and how to handle that. But I I'm feeling to sort of the threshold just beyond my death of there's something there, but beyond that it's intuition of good thing, but eyes closed, like sense of warmth on a face rather than a sense of what's there.
Hmm.
And there's also the idea that in this life, moving towards that in small ways leads to a better life, like this, which, yeah, I could easily see ways of spiraling myself down into the ground and destroying my life, but I've avoided many of those temptations, and
Yeah, I'm surprised I
yeah,
have.
yeah.
That line that you said of the more I sacrifice myself, the more I have left is really sticking.
Yeah, yeah, that was a surprise to me too.
Because it's contradictory, but it's true.
Mm.
But I'm not sure how either. More soul is left, spirit, something like that.
It's like the spirit of no, righteousness carries a connotation of like self-righteous aggrandizing, but the more the spirit of self-sacrifice for a greater cause isn't mine, which implies finite because I'm finite, but it moves through me, and by channeling that and making that sacrifice, I become more. It contributes to me on the way through. I can't sacrifice my essence, my I
Only
can't
your
no,
form,
I can't sacrifice my nature. It's my nature that grows, my character, my
spirit.
yeah, and I can't the
Nature's a good
only
word. I like
yeah,
that.
the only way to sacrifice that is the bad way, the
Yeah.
hedonistic way. You sacrifice your soul to the devil in order to fulfill your greed, and it's like
Hmm.
that.
Hedonism.
Yeah, yeah. But if you moving in the
Mm.
opposite direction, it's that same dynamic of the more you try to hang on to what you, the more you try to grab and hang on to things, the less you have. But the
Mm.
more you give them away, the more you have to give.
Things you own end up owning you.
Mm. So the you can have possessions without being possessed by them. Like if you, it depends how you
If you're
build
willing
your
to lose
nature.
them.
Yes, it's how you build your nature, how you build your identity. Like if you build your
Mm.
sense of identity around your possessions, then they possess you.
Yes.
Like you are
I'd be
their
careful with that
caretaker.
word. I would be careful with the word identity personally. There's so much
From
tied up in it. That's why I really like the word nature.
yeah, I agree, but self-identity is or sense of identity is a more commonly used term.
Yeah, but it's used in a hedonistic manner.
Mm. But the more your nature is built around the idea of having things, the
Mm.
more that dominates you. Whereas if you have possessions, But if the house burns down, it's like, oh, that's
You're
sad.
bounded by them.
Oh, the possessions are finite and can only ever be finite. And the more you define yourself by finite
Bound
things,
to them.
yeah. Whereas
There's an element in fantasy games where you can bound something, which means to summon or to desummon.
mm,
And if you are bound to something, you're connected to it, and if it breaks, it damages you.
mm,
They bind you, they hold you back. And if you lose them, you lose parts of you that were bound to them. But if you, like you say, the more that you give away, the more that you have. You are no longer bound to these things. Because you don't lose parts of you by voluntarily giving up things that you have. It's like you gain more nature back. More of you with less things for it to less externalizations. The more things you have, the more parts of you are externalizing. If you remove all of them and sit alone, everything becomes internal, not externalized in physical objects.
just thinking about the way I've sought out
Leeches.
possessions.
Yeah, they're like leeches almost.
The things that leech the most are the possessions that carry no inherent value, like diamonds or gold, money, and fancy cars and houses, and they don't give anything back. Am I trying to self-justify? Because I've got a lot of possessions, and I know I've
Maybe.
got the magpie instinct in my family. But I don't like the idea of them owning me. But I would be sad for my books to burn if the house burnt down.
Yeah, I got that feeling too.
Yeah.
What's coming up in my mind is the idea of the Dalai Lama on tour.
Mm,
And the idea is that he exudes a spiritual presence, like an aura or a vibration,
mm,
and that it touches everything in his path that is all there, but it does so temporarily. And there's some kind of association coming up in when you own things in a permanent sense, you're imprinting on them a part of you. And that is like pulling from you. And if you were to not have these things, or perhaps change your psychology to not feel attached to them, then your state comes with you. Your estate, interesting,
mm.
comes with you and is a temporary presence around you at all times, regardless if you are with your things or not. Boy, this is right on the fringes, well on the fringes. I'm simply playing with language at this point, but there's something there.
It's interesting because a lot of the
Speaking
things,
about this, I feel very, very aware of the amount of physical things behind me. I
yeah,
feel like
yeah,
I feel tied to them, like they're pulling me.
mm,
Simply speaking about it, being aware of like the 100, 150 things behind me, each with like a little, feels like a little string attaching to my person.
yeah.
Don't like it. What was it? What did he say? To sell your cloak and buy a sword.
Is that a biblical reference?
Yeah, it's a quote from Jesus, actually. There's something about that to sell the frills, because a sword is not something for display, and it is not. It's a personal thing. It's a thing that you would carry on you. An
So do I.
amplifier to will.
Your cloak is comfort.
Yes.
And
Flash,
I get the
thrill, comfort. The
the
sword
sword.
feels like an amplifier to one's willpower.
It's a tool. It's like the
Mm.
Boy Scout with his pocket knife.
Yeah.
And it's also
It's also
there's the weapon
interesting.
aspect.
But then there's the meek line as well,
Yeah.
which I think is said within the same speech.
Oh, have a sword. Sell your cloak.
Have
Just
a
spend some.
sword and do not use it.
Yeah. Well,
It's something about having a seriousness, like perhaps a physical instantiation of seriousness.
I go for the tool aspect because, like, the toys I buy for myself, tools like a 3D printer. I'm setting up my bathroom so I can use it as a darkroom sometimes.
Yeah, these are
I,
these are toys though. Like you hit the nail on the head off the bat of
yeah,
it's a toy because you could buy a better tool, but you enjoy the process of the
yeah.
small manufacturing.
Like micrometer. I found a refractometer for cheap on Facebook Marketplace recently, and of course, oh, it's like, oh, a toy, and that's a set of
Yeah,
scales that can measure to the microgram and so on. It's like these
yeah,
are.
they are tools, but they are toys because you don't have a purpose for them really.
Oh, I use some of them sometimes, like the multimeter
Yes,
Sandy and the calipers,
yes,
but I could use any
yes,
multimeter, and I could use
exactly.
any calipers, and I can
Yeah,
make do
and to
without
what
them
purpose?
to do other things.
Yeah, but the things you my point is like you have these small scale toys that are
Mm,
tools, but
mm.
you would use them in service of playing with your other tools that are toys.
Well, I've got my electronic stuff. To a large degree, you're definitely right, but there's also an element of potential for service in there. Like that
Yeah,
was before I would,
yeah, it plays
when I
into your
was,
backup thing.
yeah, yeah. But before we'd gone through the process where I explored the resistance to spending money on myself, like I got into ham radio with the image in my head being, oh no, a disaster hit. We need communication. Okay, I can do that. And not really a savior mentality, but this is a way I can be useful thing. And like I've got all these tools, and I've done a few 3D prints for friends and things like that, and setting up the photography. And I want to set up so I can take photos of books off the computer so that I can analogize them for safe storage in case of EMP or whatever,
Mm.
microfilm and things like that. Like it's toys and they're fun, and there's an element of that. It's innocent. It's not innocent. It's
Is it
innocent
because it's
fun.
a hobby?
Hang on, yeah.
I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with innocent, but what's coming up for me is the analogy with what I do.
Mm,
Well, like I'm a farmer now,
yeah.
and I did that as a practical knock-on effect of effectively the same set of ideas. How to be most useful in a collapse scenario, effectively.
Mm,
And I went for okay, be close to the food for personal, but also being able to help with growing the food,
mm,
maintaining it, keeping things working. It feels less like play. Like the other day, um, we killed, skinned, and butchered some sheep. That's in my freezer. You know, I had one of the livers for lunch. That didn't feel like play,
mm. That's not
but
because it's
that
not for
is
you. Oh, it's
well,
for future
it's for
you.
life. Yes, yeah, I want to be in the position where I can have my own food and grow my own food for my family
Mm.
and for me and for others. I think that the difference between the play and the not play might be because I do it for work.
Mm.
Like if your job was
photography or 3D printing or something.
Yeah, like ham radio specialist for the military or something,
Mm.
like something serious. Just working in a wee shop fixing them is less serious. But something with
Unless there's someone waiting for you to get it so they can go do another job.
yeah, I mean that
Yeah.
adds a bit more. Or maybe like Coast Guard radio or something like
Mm.
that. Or search and rescue radio, you know. There's an element of I have chosen to do this and it's serious because all of these things relying on it. I don't know. I'm having a hard
Ooh.
time with this one as well, but you're right. There is something there.
Like if you pointless wealth, pointless accumulation is the kid hoarding all the toys and not letting anyone else play with them, in metaphor.
Yeah.
Like even without all the kids, it's the kid saying, I want all the toys, wah, buy me more toys. But that's not playing with them, that's possessing them. But if you play with things, that is the
Mm.
innocent sort of, that's expanding. Like kids go play. That's good. You're expanding yourselves. We
Boy,
as
what a way to
adults play
switch
with
that.
bigger toys. We
I
expand
like that.
ourselves with bigger toys, and of course we might become attached to our toys, but there's an element to work on there, but it's not about it's like I've expanded myself with the 3D printer in new ways. I could get a computer with access to the internet and any 3D printer and basically make stuff with it. So I've
Hmm.
expanded myself in that way. And it's like, sure, it's good to keep this one and keep it in working condition and so on, but I could use someone else's, I could get another one, or I could just lose that tool entirely and then, oh well, that's a shame, that's annoying, I can't do these things anymore. And similarly with the other tools, like a multimeter is really handy for certain things. And that fits less into the toy category in my head because I don't play with it. It's a simple device. You use
Yeah,
it
you
to
use
accomplish
it.
other things.
There's no
Whereas,
exploration there.
yeah, like the
Learning.
refractometer was a recent one, and I want to play with that by getting different fruit juices and smear that on and then use it to measure the sugar content, which is supposed to be proportional to the nutrient content.
Hmm.
It'd be interesting to test a bunch of different batches of carrots like that
Your
and see
idea
how
of
the
play is
taste
very
correlates.
different from mine. Like my idea of play at the moment is I want to play video games in my bedroom next to my wife who watches TV. So I'm going to run a DisplayPort cable from my computer here under the house and up into my bedroom where I'll mount a monitor and have controllers and headset and all that coming out of the screen.
Hmm.
That's my play, is setting up stuff like that.
Setting up or using.
Setting up,
Yeah.
planning what to get, how to install it, how all of the functions will work to make sure it'll work. Like resetting up my internet connection so that I could have an open NAT type for online gaming. Like that's cool and that's useful to me now. But on a night when my wife wasn't in the house and I wanted to spend the evening playing games, what I ended up doing was having a bunch of drinks, cranking my music pretty loud, and digging through my router's firmware to change network addressing ports. And like disabling Starlink and bypassing it and setting up another router and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And like now it works and that's cool. Hooray. Or running Ethernet under the house and all the way to the far corner where I am.
Yeah. This is interesting because we've talked before about my seeming what is it? Prejudice against the idea of playing. That I think it's been working on it in the background still in my head. But
With games in particular.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
watching movies and TV.
Yeah.
Entertainment might be a better word.
Mm. Or even like the 3D printer was the thing I got as I was working through that. Like that
Hmm.
I got that as a toy.
I would like to make a case to that part
Mm.
of you that has an objection to the things that are simply entertainment.
Mm.
Um, for me, a large part of enjoyment with movies is developing a sense of taste, of understanding like what makes a good movie and what doesn't, or how to
mm,
know if something is well filmed. That's something that I've really, really enjoyed. Like you could just watch a movie and watch another movie and go, "Oh yeah, that was fun. That wasn't." But
critiquing
the
it.
nerd in me obviously ended up watching like small YouTube videos about what makes this film such a masterfully shot one, what makes this one not so great, and comparisons and all that kind of thing. And with just a little bit of knowledge, you can have that level of discernment of
It's interesting
it's
how
not like that's
often.
valuable in and of itself,
Mm,
but there's something about being able to appreciate it. Like there are things in the world that many people enjoy, whether it's movies or music or otherwise,
oh,
and being able to be a person that can go, yes, I enjoy these, but I also only I perhaps it's trying to improve the sense of discernment or discrimination. Discernment probably the preferable word.
play mirrors the serious in the sense of
Well, yeah, it's preparation,
yeah, like if you look at
like kids play.
yeah, yeah, if you look at uh herbivore babies versus predator babies, they play in different ways. Predator babies, like kittens and dogs, pounce and sneak up and jump on things, so on hunting. Um,
Equally
herbivores,
rough and tumble play.
yeah, yeah, herbivores is more hiding
Yeah.
and so on and running. And we as adults are playing in ways that if you took out of context those actions and changed the context around, that could be a job for someone. Like
Yes.
change a few hundred years and kids sword fighting. It's like with sticks and so on. It's like, okay, that is training for soldier with a sword and the sort of idealized
Or
profession.
home defense.
Yeah, yeah. Or the times when every able-bodied man had to train with a longbow or something.
Yeah. And like my whole teenage years, I built computers.
Mm,
I did like networking stuff in my home. Like that was playing for me, but that
mm,
very easily could have been a job. I mean, I was halfway through a degree to do that. And a
mm.
lot of the stuff I already knew for that reason.
I play with
Like girls
spreadsheets
who play
sometimes.
with like girls who play with dolls, training to be mums. Boys who play with physical objects, bricks,
Yeah,
trucks, you know. They're playing pretend to be adults in whatever way that interests them.
because it feels like the idea of playing with dolls has been minimalized these days, or the relevance of it, the value of it,
And that's because everyone hates women.
especially the feminists.
Well, yeah, of course. They think the best thing a woman can be is a man.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that one really annoys me how little respect we have for women in our society.
I had an interesting conversation along those lines recently. A play date of my son, his mum brought a friend of my son's around, and we were talking while they were off playing, and Uh, she's a lesbian, so that gave her an interesting perspective on it. And when I mentioned sort of man-hating feminists, she burst out laughing because she hadn't seen it that way, but it's true. And
Yeah.
I think I was talking about how, like, as a man, I have a smaller sort of social battery with my son than a woman would, in the same way that a man can generally lift heavier things than a woman. A woman can generally handle a kid for longer. Not to say they
Tolerate.
don't get overwhelmed and burnt out, so on. Absolutely, there are
Tolerate
things that
is
are
the
too
word.
heavy. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have more tolerance, and but at the
Well, they
same
haven't run
time, like
nations.
she was talking about a friend of hers who works in the mines in Australia, a female friend, and like that woman is probably harder than most of the men there. It's like there's edge cases of all kinds, and like go ye and do your thing. But it's like saying that the working in the mines is of more value than raising a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah,
It's
and it
yeah.
comes back to are you making the individual case or are you making the collective case? Because it's all well and good to say, well, for this one individual, going and working the mines might be great. Like, sure, as long as you don't demonize what's good for the majority of women, which is
Yes.
having children and being mums. And of course, that same person would go, how dare you say that? That's well, then shut up, because you don't care about the edge case at all. You care about forcing women into work so they can pay more taxes. And in whatever vision you have for women that are so great they should behave exactly like men do in the most stereotypical fashion. It's insane to me. I really do hate it how much women are not respected, particularly because I have a wife and 3 daughters. Kind of matters to me, and just seeing how people treat her because she raises her kids and doesn't put them in daycare so she can go work for someone else and never see them. Yeah, it's I hate it so much. But hopefully the big political pendulum swing that's coming will fix that.
Hopefully it doesn't swing too far, because it's always too far.
I prefer too far that way than too far this way right now, so I don't care. We can always recorrect later.
Yeah. We know the direction we need to move in.
Well, I was talking about this with my wife today, and it struck me that it has become acceptable on the right-leaning side of the political spectrum to discuss the idea that women shouldn't vote. That's inside the Overton window now.
Leaving aside any commentary on that question itself, that's interesting that it's inside the Overton window, and I guarantee it's not just men discussing it.
No, the biggest spearheaders of that movement are women.
Yeah. That's
which we have been saying for a while was what needed to happen for that to happen. And it has. And yeah, my wife believes that a hell of a lot more strongly than I do. Personally, I believe that the solution is the if you wish to vote, you must enroll in military reserves.
I'm just trying to understand why this feels good to me to hear that. And of course,
because you're not insane. That's why.
It's what's it? It's women wanting to be women.
Yeah.
By their definition, not mine.
No, but existence, by reality's definition. Look, we were talking about this earlier today. I'll keep referencing it because we had a great conversation. The idea that the kind of constitution that you need to have to run a home is the same kind of constitution that you need to have to run a nation is fucking insane. In a home, everyone needs to be treated equally and fairly. Everyone needs to have a fair and same amount of food. Everyone needs to be not mean and pushing and shoving each other. Rules need to be upheld, and individual circumstances need to be taken into account to make sure everyone is acceptable and happy. That's not trolley problem thinking, which is what nation state has to deal with, of how many people need to die in order for this goal to be achieved or this catastrophe to be prevented, which is that other end of scale.
And how many people will die if we don't go down that route?
Exactly, which is why you get into the position of 80% of left-wing voters are women and 80% of right-wing voters are men, which means that the political battle is men versus women, which is why the left side of the spectrum is always consist of effectively 2 things. One, taxing higher to take money from men and then giving it to women through social benefits, because men pay all the taxes and women receive all of them. And then the other one is feel-good issues, things that sound really good, like we're doing the best thing to care for everyone's individual cases and needs, but are actually disastrous for society as a whole. Like paying people to be homeless or whatever, or the giving alcohol to alcoholics because they need help and support. Obviously, I'm strawmanning a little bit, but you get that point. It's always the case of which poor, discriminated group needs to have all of society's care and attention, even though it creates an incentive for people to be degenerate. And then the other side of the political spectrum is always like, how about you let us do our jobs and get on with our businesses and get the degeneracy away and have rule of law and maybe a bit of, social restriction on what acceptable behavior is. And that's why the political argument is that way.
There was, what was that quote? I'm communist in my house, I'm socialist in my town, I'm democratic in my city, and I'm Republican in my country, or something along those lines.
Republican in my state and libertarian in my federal policies. Yeah. That's the idea, is that what is applicable here is not applicable at a nation state level. As you go up the power hierarchy, it needs to be a lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter touch. Hence why we talked about earlier the laws in Christchurch about fire restrictions being okay, because it's you guys voting for that. You're not imposing it on me. That's fine. And you guys want to do that, you go for it. And then that's local elections in play. Awesome. It's when you start going out and enforcing it upon the farmers that live, 50 k's inland from you that it becomes a problem. Or having, feel-good policies when it comes to immigration would be a pretty good example of this.
Yeah.
It sounds good. It makes me feel good. Therefore, I vote for it. And then, damage ensues. Because you're not thinking about the second or third order effects. You're just thinking about how it makes you feel good in the moment. Something hormones.
Which are essential and needed in different contexts.
Well, it's just reality. I mean, sorry to burst the bubble that women aren't men and men aren't women. We are specialized for a reason. And here's an asterisk, just to throw it in. Everything that men are was made by women. Men don't sexually select men. Sorry.
Yep.
So you want to grump about... Yeah, exactly. You want to grump about what men are, grump about the women who chose them. Because that's how evolution and sexual selection works. I'm sorry, you got exactly what you asked for. Every time. That's fine. And same for women, to be fair, on the men's side. Although less, because if a man says no, another man will say yes. So that doesn't help so much. Effectively, all women will always have children, so that's not really that helpful. Hence why there's less variability.
That all women will always have children is just
all asterisks, I know, but you know my point.
All women who want to have children can.
Bingo. Before birth control, all women have children.
Yeah.
Boy, that's something I don't want to start talking about. I can't stand that.
Should we segue from that to the joyful
bad.
topic of collapse of civilization? Again.
God, hour and 40 minutes. All right, we want to wrap this up? What do we got?
Yep.
Collapse of civilization.
So...
I blame birth control.
We've got the age-old argument of... there's an age-old argument of morals and culture versus energy, and I think it's a yes both situation.
Probably.
And if you had a declining resource base and
makes the moral standard higher over time, and therefore more people will fail it. Yeah. Or as conditions get rougher and rougher, the level of moral constitution needed to not fall prey to baser desires increases,
Mm,
and therefore more people will fall out of it. So it's probably a both.
mm.
Although when it comes to before that,
But you've also got the period of plenty before the resource base is used up that leads to
which
a
is
lower
where
bar.
my argument comes from. Oh, that's a good point too. Yeah, but my argument comes from the point of having high moral constitution in the plentiful time is what gets you to maintain or grow it.
Mm,
And if you drop, weak, good times make weak men kind of thing. If
mm,
that drops, then you're likely to destroy your access to resources.
mm.
That's why the world's at the brink of war at the moment.
And then in that dropping phase, is it possible to recover the moral stance to such a point that the drop can be halted in reverse?
I believe so.
And I think that efforts in that direction would lead to a better result either way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that's why we have a pendulum swing in terms
Mm,
of, obviously in the modern world, that would be parties in power.
mm,
But in the older world, that would be in terms of cultural beliefs and attitudes influencing those who are in power.
mm. On the cultural side, I'm just thinking of combining the cultural and resource side. Like on the resource side, the scenario that I expect based on others' work, not mine, was a which way to get them? Oh, I don't know. I don't know which way on the mirror image of the camera, but um, you start at your peak, and then you start running low on resources. You've had good times. The moral standard has dropped. There's been internal division built up in the society, and then you run short of it. Some hard times arrive that necessitates or enforces some level of um, pulling your pants up to do better. And then that, along with the fact that the consumption has now dropped to a level that the current resource base can support, causes an uptick, which,
So it's like a wave on the way down is your idea.
yeah, yeah. Because the wave on the way down from a resource perspective was the one I've read, but that would also play out in the cultural sense of, oh, the crisis isn't so bad now, and oh no, we need to get even better. And then that has like, you don't go to
It's a
100%
very
moral virtue.
determinist view.
That's something that another point that I think we differ on is I tend to be determinist on the population scale, not on the individual scale. And I agree that it's made of the population's made of individuals, but on the population scale, it feels like all you can do is, as an individual, add a little bit of weight to the, the ship's wheel. So you can't change the position of the ship, but you can try and alter the course slightly.
I don't know. I feel like significant historical figures might be a good counter argument to that.
Yeah, yeah, they're motivating. Like Jordan Peterson seems to be doing this. That
Yeah, he's a
they're
good modern example. Sure, yeah.
yeah, like started Peterson Academy recently, and who knows what that'll do for the university structure as a whole.
Trump's another example, I suppose. But I was
Yep.
meaning people like Plato
Mm,
or Galileo or Copernicus or something like that. Like people can have a massive impact. Individuals.
mm. And there are times when history turns on the head of a pin or pointy end of a pin. Thinking
Yeah.
Churchill in the UK.
Yep.
And I don't think the Nazis would have taken America, and America probably would have come back and said, "Hell no, you're not getting
I
away with
think
whatever you're doing." But
I think obviously it is a scale.
mm,
It was some part deterministic, more based on um,
crowd mentality.
unconscious crowd
Mm,
moving with the trends, and then other half, not half, other part being conscious individuals trying to steer the ship, and probably evil conscious individuals trying to steer the ship their way, and the battle being played out that way. I guess the question comes down to what percentage you believe to be the unconscious crowd moving the trends, and what percentage being individuals that may be able to sway the direction of things.
Well, with the internet, the percentage of conscious individuals could be tiny.
But amplified
Yeah.
leverage. Yeah. So that gives more argument that we could make things better.
I don't think we could reverse the decline of civilization as a whole. I think we broadly agree on it, but there's a definitional
I think we
argument
could.
here that. Sorry?
I think we could.
I suspect we mean different things by that.
I think that no matter what, there'll be a dip, but I think if the right policies were put in place, a sufficiently forward-looking person could right the ship in 10-year time span. I think you would have a dip in the middle of that, or at least a large amount of civil unrest. But I think that you could do it. Depends how heavy-handed you were, I suppose.
It's the expanding versus limited stretchy pie.
Yeah, well, and definitely expanding pie person. But I don't think that we're close to our limit, if it is limited.
I think a lot of the growth in the pie that we've had as a civilization comes from taking the pie of the rest of the biosphere. Like something like, was it 30% of the biomass of the Earth is humans alone? Like, so out of.
And where's that trend going?
I don't know.
Down.
So why is it going down?
Because there's no one's having enough babies.
Yeah, the high consumption areas are experiencing population growth reduction that's leading to population decline.
I'd say
already
collapse.
Or soon.
Probably, but yeah.
Anyway, collapse implies
it implies permanent.
Destructive
You're right.
Impact. It's
a restriction.
Well,
I'd say it will be destructive, but maybe not completely destructive.
Yeah. It's a rapid decline that will have destructive consequences in the society, but probably not catastrophic.
Well,
depending on
it
society.
depends. It depends on how you handle it. I think you could handle it pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think you could turn the ship pretty damn quickly, if you were smart enough.
That's an interesting side thought. The idea.
Getting dangerous to policy. Was it? What's that word? Policy plan? Yeah.
Policy. What do you mean?
We're inching very close to the how would you handle this question.
No, I'm feeling doubt that intelligence is the answer. It feels like a very Luciferian pride in intelligence answer. And I had a sort of red flag of just doubt associated with that idea that intelligence is the solution.
I could definitely respect that. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's better than stupidity being at the helm of power.
I agree that you need intelligence there to handle the complexities in a mental horsepower sense, but I think the idea that intelligence is the solution is wrong. I think.
Well, there's intelligent people there now. They're just evil.
Yeah, wisdom and moral goodness, which are kind of combined together.
Well, I think in a large part is a sense of willingness to do what is unpopular is needed. And it's hard to do that in a democratic sense. How do you do what is unpopular to the populace, even if it's good for them?
Mm.
Well, even if it would be considered outrageous.
In today's democratic society, you can't, because you'll get voted out and the next guy will change it.
Yeah, like the abortion example. They've
Mm.
been fighting that battle for years, and they're not making a whole lot of headway because it's outrageous to think that you would not allow someone to murder.
Well, both sides have gone to the extreme ends of their own arguments. Like no abortion at all ever is the sort of extreme end. Not that
Well,
everyone's
yeah,
there,
I don't
and
think there's a way to get around that.
and the other side, of course, is the only
Yeah,
talked about sometimes, but still being talked about of babies
killing the
born
baby, and
and then making the decision, and it's just
yeah,
like that's murder.
yeah. Well, I would argue the whole thing is, but Peterson is very right on this. That is, you're missing the point.
Mm.
You're discussing what happens with the baby rather than what happens to make it.
Mm.
Like that's the
Yeah,
actual discussion. How do
yeah,
you
and
handle sex? Not
the
what do
situation
you
that,
do with the result of it?
yeah, and the situation that the that results in people choosing abortion or not feeling like they have another option. Like banning abortion has known effects from before it was ever allowed in the first place, of sort of DIY abortions leading to women dying.
Well, I
Right?
mean, if you kill yourself and the risk of trying to kill someone else, I don't really care, personally.
That sounds like a reasonable argument.
Yeah. But personally, I think, yeah, the solution is to go after treating sex as casually as we do, rather than like
Mm.
what people do with the baby,
Yeah,
personally.
yeah, that's something that. What is it? Yeah, we as a society are still working out how to treat sex with effective birth control, or at least 99% effective birth control. Like
Well,
there's
I wonder if it'll become a moot point when people realize how horrible for women birth control is.
mm,
Like, I know it's not a thing that people talk about because it's unacceptable to discuss, but the reality of the matter is it's really, really bad for women to take this, for their health, for their mental health, for their life. Like permanent psychological changes,
mm.
permanent personality changes, permanent preference and mate changes. These are not good things.
I think they're
And to
things
prescribe it
that
to
can.
everyone for reasons that are, what was it? It
Mm,
was a lady that was talking about it. That she had such a great point, is that the birth control pill is looked at by the medical field as an antidote for being a woman. A
oh,
woman goes to a doctor and says, I have a problem, and the doctor says, birth control. You have woman problem, birth control. You have anxiety, birth control. You have depression, birth control. Any problem associated with being a woman, here's the antidote. Here's the pill. Stop being one.
like there are certainly certain medical conditions that, like particular medical conditions, that can be a great
Yes,
solution for, but that's medicating for an
yes.
individual condition, not just for blanket treatment.
Okay. Yes and no, because the side effects are never discussed. It's
Mm,
treated like paracetamol. This kind of
yeah.
idea that oh, it's a magic thing. It solves all the problems and it has no downsides ever.
Informed consent's not a thing anymore, is it?
No, of course not. You're not allowed to choose what happens with your body. What are you talking about? That's the doctor's job.
Yeah.
It's insane. Yeah, the idea that a drug would have side effects is like unacceptable to discuss now,
Mm.
particularly that one, and the side effects for it are horrendous. But no one's going to talk about that.
In a society that has such trouble discussing such
With children.
small issues compared to the wider issues we face.
Yep.
I'm not optimistic that a cultural moral turnaround that has the potential to reverse the decline or cushion or adapt to the decline of the civilization could happen.
Not a democratic one. Not unless, well, it depends on how much faith you have in the populace, I suppose.
I guess I expect our civilization to go down the same way all the others did, because humans panic the same way.
Yes and no. We'll clamber for a strong man. The question is, do we get a strong moral man or a strong immoral man?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if we clamber for a strong man and we latch onto one and he gets put in power and given strong man powers, like traditionally speaking, and he was actually a good man, you could see some massive changes to Western society for a really good cause.
There are examples
People wouldn't
in
like
history.
it. Yeah, like it happens. It's not, it's
Yeah.
not common, but
Um,
we cling and we want a strong man to protect us and like accidentally elect a philosopher. Boy, you could
yeah.
make a great civilization
Oh,
for one man's life being in that position of power.
the
Of course,
example,
you get the succession problem immediately after, but
yeah, the example that comes to mind is Marcus Aurelius. Like he
God, I love that
paused the
guy.
decline of Rome for the period he was emperor, and I think
Paused is a little. I think he did more than pause.
yeah, I don't know enough details to speak to that. But then, as you say, he arranged all these good advisors for his son when he knew before he
Yeah.
died. He died of a plague that he spent most of his reign fighting, I think, and he was a rather physically frail guy, I think.
Yeah.
But then he died, and his son ignored all the advisors, and everything went to hell again. So,
And not as wise as he might have, But, culture is culture. You can't change something overnight from
yeah.
one political system to another.
If you had a dynasty of Marcus Aurelius's, I could see that
You could
turning
do a
things around.
pretty good job because in the modern world, we have a bloody good example, which is the founding of the United States. You could do a pretty damn good job with a strong man in charge of that for 10, 15, 20 years. And at the end of that, going, okay, I've done what I need to do, cut all ties, reset down to states having control and power, and destroy the federal government back down to what it originally was. There'd be all kinds of chaos ensuing under the small, but at least there's a system to fall back on.
Yeah.
Rather than needing to have a line of Marcus Aurelius's. You could get away with one as long as that person could complete their reign, get the jobs done that they needed to do, and then pass it back down. And to put that even to a step further, I think you could get away with a single good man being in the United States presidency for a single term, doing the work that he needed to do, and hopefully not getting assassinated in that time, and then dissolving a large part of the federal government as he exits. Like, you could do that, and the laws are there to do that, and have it save the Western world in a large extent.
There is an effect now.
But it depends on how much political capital the person has.
I just
get so
made
much done.
a connection that I think. Okay, would you agree that there are, based on resource issues, times that it is easier to rise as a civilization than others?
Yeah, of course. That's why Europe thrived and Australia didn't. They had horses and cows.
So
and sheep.
I think there's a larger cultural aspect to that as well. But
Well, yes.
Yeah.
True. But
the Americas versus Europe would probably be a better example.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to tame the bison stick.
But anyway, okay. So once you finish coughing, on the upswing of the civilization, right, you can get away with bad leaders because there's plenty of fat in the system.
But you don't tend to get them.
Yes, that too.
Yeah, the
So
early presidents of the United States were pretty damn good.
so there's a bias toward better leadership in the earlier phase of a civilization,
Good. What is it? Hard times make strong men.
and they've come from a period of what for them was
Hmm.
normal times, and they're now making a good time.
Yeah, and they're presiding over a great growth, which is a
Mm.
calling.
And it's before career politician has become a thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Early stages before corruption seeps into the organization. It's got to seep in at the low levels first.
And then after the growth phase and the peak phase, when you're getting into the decline phase, then you've got the headwind of resources and a good creative leadership can deal with that and make do in that situation and bring individual prosperity or bring prosperity back, not abundant resources, but well managed finite resources.
I guess it depends on where you think in the curve we are, because I think I would agree with you if we are already fairly far down the curve, it's hard to turn up again.
Mm.
But if we're sort of at the peak and flattening, I think you could push it back up to push the peak further out.
Pushing the peak further out in the socio-cultural sense is different to pushing it out in the total consumption sense, though.
No, actually, no, I disagree. I think great men could create great civilizations even in the hardest of times. So I don't think I agree with that. I think regardless of the circumstances, if you had good enough men, you could make things better. Be harder, less likely. Probability says you may be right, but I don't think probability is certainty. I think it depends on the constitution of the people involved.
I think I can accept that it would take the entire culture behind it. Essentially, it would take a
visionary leader,
visionary
one that
leader.
inspires the people.
Yeah, it would take an inspired population with a visionary leader who has the right answers. Not they need to have the right answers as well, or be able to find them.
Yeah, we may have a visionary leader, but I'm not entirely sure I have the right answers.
Yeah. So on the downswing, you need to have a visionary leader with the right answers who inspires the population while times are getting tougher. So you need all of those at once to pull it up. On the upslope, you have stronger people, a stronger population.
And there's
As a whole.
more decentralized things going on. There'll be people on the fringes who are working in their own areas to increase resources and having success at that on the upswing.
Yes.
Easier to preside over.
So
people are not in retreat.
Yeah. So from a probabilistic sense, the rise and fall are reasonably well determined. There are edge cases that can pull it out or crash it on the way up.
Yes.
But
yeah, I think it all does come down to people. Because I don't think you're going to have a rise to a great civilization without people carrying it the whole way up. Because at any moment it could peak and fall. At any moment. Statistically. Yeah, I think statistically at any point in a civilization's growth, right now is the right point for it to peak and crash. But for the good men who keep it climbing.
I think the resource base still contributes, like a headwind tailwind effect. You can screw up your resource base, but if you've got lots of room to go do
Depends what you
something
do with
else.
it. Like, you could have massive amounts of resources and have the king keep it all for himself and starve all the people. It's not going to get very far.
I don't think that's okay. So if you've got a growth scenario, that implies you have conditions for growth.
Yeah.
That implies that in order for the king to keep it all to himself and starve his people, Soviet Union
Bingo. Excessive taxes, stripping it all from
and
everyone, and collapse.
gulags and purges and things like that. It's definitely possible.
Yep.
So just like the fact that the Soviet Union was a isolated collapse on the upside of our
Hmm.
civilization, arguably near the peak, but there's others at different periods earlier, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and so on.
You think you're trying to find an example for rising from nothing?
No, I'm just thinking of I'm finding reinforcement or seeing reinforcement of the general structure that we've come up with that or what you described that bad situations or leaders can crash a civilization
Hmm.
on the way up, and it has
Yeah.
happened in many isolated cases in the upswing of our current civilization,
Venezuela.
and then mm, and then on the way down, visionary leaders with inspired populations can reverse that process, but that's not going to be a system wide reversal. You're not going to have a leader inspiring the entire planet. It'll be this country reversed their situation. And so by
Churchill.
not, yeah, yeah, because in that period, the Britain was on the back foot, being pushed back, losing.
Hmm.
And then he
They're
managed to
invaded.
inspire yeah, literal bombers coming over every night. And he
Yep. Keep
managed
calm
to,
and carry on.
yeah. I think there's more to it than that. Like a visionary leader on his own doesn't do it. You
No,
need
circumstances need to.
you need more people who are doing the same or working toward the same end with the same
A visionary leader needs to
consciousness.
be visionary in his time. If he is visionary too far ahead of his time, then his message will fall on deaf ears. It needs to be the right message for the right
Mm.
time. Like the artist who's too far ahead of his time and his work is not appreciated till after he dies.
I think I
It
was
needs
getting
to
lost in
be,
nuances. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like, Van Gogh or whatever.
Mm.
It needs to be the kind of person who is appreciated in his time as a great leader, one who will have a message that resounds with the people right now,
Mm.
not 50 years from now.
Mm. So I think one of the points that I'm thinking now that we won't disagree with it, but I think by not quite seeing the same thing, I think we've disagreed before, but the collapse or the decline of Western civilization that's coming towards us from the horizon at the moment, arguably here already, depends how you define a bunch of stuff, but that if you had a bunch of visionary leaders in a bunch of countries all at the same time, all inspiring their populations with a shared vision, so you had basically the entire West suddenly ruled by visionary leaders,
I
then
don't think you'd need all of the West. I think you just need the States because of the cultural unification through the internet. Like, we might as well be another state at this point, or a territory would probably be a better example.
maybe.
I see what you're getting at. There
But
does
it,
need to be a certain sense of us following.
mm.
But I think that would probably happen pretty naturally.
But I think that it's not impossible for that scenario to play out somehow, although I see it as low probability to reverse the whole decline, but reversing it in particular areas, like visionary good leaders come to power in some areas in certain countries and so
Like a
on.
community.
Well, the smaller you go, the easier it is.
Yeah. I think my contention would be the case that I think if you stood at any moment in history, in any civilization, you could see the inevitable collapse of it from where you are standing as if it was the peak.
Mm.
And that the only reason that it would not happen is if great men were to keep carrying it upwards by doing the right actions that you may be able to see from your lowly position, but perhaps you think those in power cannot or will not through incompetence or evil.
Mm.
It is hard to objectively say we're at a peak or a decline. I think,
Need 100 years
and
history to see.
yeah, it's something you could see in hindsight, not something you could see at the time. I think it comes down to your faith in humanity on how likely or unlikely you think things would go. Like, from my understanding of the collapse of Rome, for a long time, most of the populace knew how bad things were, and the political elite class ignored them and did not care what the peasants thought.
Making rules that you must go into the profession of your father.
Sorry?
I recall something about there being a rule made in those times that someone had to go into the same profession as their father because there were too many people who were just not engaging in the economy, and so the economy was going down.
Okay. I guess so. That was, yeah.
Yeah. Didn't work.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
But yeah, my point being that I think at any point in history you could say we're at the peak, and that if only, like, we will fall and collapse unless good people get in power. And it comes down to how much faith you have in those good people stepping forth versus not. And in the modern day, how much faith you have in the populace electing them versus not. And I suppose in a biblical sense, it'd come back to, how many good men need to be in Sodom and Gomorrah for God not to smite it. And yeah, it's sort of up to your personal philosophy of how many great people do we need, or good people do we need in order to right the ship? Is it lots? Is it few? Is it half? Where is the line? And if it is such a great hurdle, why is it so hard to falter? And I suppose that comes back to the resource argument of when resources are high, the bar is lower. When resources are low, the bar is higher. I'm not sure this is an argument that could be settled.
I don't think it can be, but I think that
I think it requires less people than you is probably the answer to our dilemma, at least.
Yeah. But I think I'm glad we had this discussion because I feel like I've taken a couple of steps toward your position, or at least I understand both
Likewise.
my and your position better.
Yeah, like almost the same as the spirituality discussion. We've sort of fleshed out both enough to see that we both actually agree, but we're sort of focusing on the different aspects, and that the integration of the two beliefs is the most accurate.
Which is an interesting date
Discussion.
because yeah. speech or conversation is
Yeah.
equivalent to thought.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thinking.
Mm,
This is the great purpose of language,
yeah.
the pursuit of truth.
It's like I'm looking at this bit saying, I'm sure this is right. I'm sure this is what I'm saying. And you're looking at that bit and saying the same thing. And we're like, no, that's not what it is. And then we end up
Yeah,
discovering
because
we're pointing our torches in different
we
directions.
express them in low resolution statements,
Mm,
and each one is like an absolute statement. Because of course they are. You have to do that when you express in low resolution. When we
mm,
expand them out into high resolution and realize it's the same map, we're just making the statement of this is a thing and this is a thing. And both of us agree that those are a thing. We just disagreed on which one is of priority.
mm.
And I
And
don't think that that's a disagreement that needs to be settled.
I agree. We've sort of come to a conclusion that both are influences, and it's just is the threshold here or here in this
Yeah,
phase? Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and
I think it's fascinating how similar our worldview and our perceptions are.
mm,
It's unusual to find someone who has such a similar map, particularly because I've had such a weird and eclectic life. And your life has been very, very different from mine.
mm,
To sort of have a very similar map. Like even when we first met and you were discussing a lot of the sort of ritualistic practices you were doing is contacting other beings, say it that way.
mm.
We still had a very similar map and belief of these things. We just had a different sense of importance placed on them.
Mm.
Like we both look at the world in the same way from different angles, I suppose.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And it also tends to indicate that what we're looking at is real, or what
Hmm.
we are thinking about is real, in both the spiritual and the civilizational sense, that we're seeing patterns, and at first our different perspectives seem to disagree, which is an interesting lesson for um, discussion between apparently disagreeing points of all types.
Yeah.
But then as we,
The more we explore the conversation, the more ground we cover, we find that we end up meeting in the middle
yeah,
and going,
I agree.
actually, we agree on these things. It's just when I say this one statement, I actually mean this whole realm of knowledge.
Yeah,
And when you
where for
say this
me,
one statement, you mean this whole realm. And they actually Venn diagram most of the way.
yeah, and it's like the effect of moral standing and
Soundbite.
visionary leaders is a thing on the edge of my map, or at least it was before we had this whole discussion train
I
going back
wonder
years.
how much of the left wing versus right wing debate comes down to limited bandwidth. And now we have lots of bandwidth but limited attention.
I think the left right bandwidth has narrowed a lot as well in recent years.
As in intergroup communication?
Yes.
Yeah, probably. Each side is so well. There's a problem there. I think that if you could get a right wing person and a left wing person who both believed language was used in the pursuit of truth,
Mm,
and sat them down and had them discuss ad infinitum, they would eventually agree on most things and disagree on how to get there, which is the
mm,
way things used to be. But I think the problem is that you have what was once a small segment and now a large subsection of the left has broken off into complete moral relativism. Words are nothing but a means to power
mm.
and a tool to manipulate others.
And
At which point you can't discuss with someone who uses words as a weapon, not
mm,
as a tool.
and the rest of the left has kind of chased after them to not lose their voting bloc.
Yeah, yeah, and as they've run exceedingly in that direction, those who have stopped and straggled behind have like slowly moved over as the right wing border has expanded. I think the populace of the right wing has stayed, but the border has expanded
Mm,
out to encompass a lot of what was the left.
Yeah, there certainly seems to be a rearrangement of what each party stands for happening. Like the left is the
Yeah.
Republicans are becoming the pro-war party, and the
Uh,
sorry, no, other way around. The
anti. Yeah, yeah,
Democrats
yeah.
are becoming the pro-war party, and the Republicans are becoming the anti-war party. And yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
strange to see that the Republican tent is now comprised of people that are fervently like anti-gay, full Christian nationalist types,
that's a
and
bunch
like
of union guys as well.
full libertarian types,
Mm,
and old school blue dog Democrat union guys who are
yeah,
like pro social programs and like pro gay marriage and just standard original Democrats. They're all in the same party now, and they're like shaking hands, going, I disagree with you, but I respect your right to speak and
yeah,
and discuss, and I will accept that as long as you don't try and kill me, like these guys are.
yeah, yeah. Or transition my children.
Yeah, exactly. God, that is the line that they crossed.
Yeah, it's like I don't like you, but you're not them, so you're okay.
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy, man.
Yeah.
The amount of memes that have come out about that, about like the two real muscly guys grabbing hands. Oh, I love it.
Oh
I
yeah.
absolutely love it. Oh well,
Uh,
that was a bloody good episode. I think we definitely call it there.
yep.
Thanks for all those who stuck around. We came out of the gate with it too, which I really like.
Yeah, we took a few detours and then came back in the end, but yeah.
I think we held it pretty good the whole way through. As always is the problem is that we do these shows, and the first hour is sort of always meh stuff, and then
Mm,
the second hour is where the gold is.
mm,
And this time, because we split it, we had the meh stuff as last week's episode, and then we've had 2.5 hours, by the way, of this as the where the gold is. And because we started earlier in the day, normally we get like an hour into this conversation and go, "Oh, this is 9:30. I'm tired. Let's go." No, we've done 2.5 hours, and I'm still pretty awake.
yeah, after an hour earlier. So it's 3.5 with a break.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
We've done
should go
really
have
well. Like,
dinner.
I mean, it's 7:30. It's not even late. Normally we'd start recording about now.
Mm,
So this is a much better format. Um, yeah, there's a bunch of inside baseball stuff I want to talk, but I think maybe I'll discuss that with you after. I'll say good night to everyone else.
yep. Good
Thanks for
night.
sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed. I really enjoyed
Yep.
tonight's one, and I hope we can do more like this.
Yep. Bye.
Bye, everyone.